We'll get started here. Exodus chapter 6, where we left off with the, I think verse 14, Nate, I think, you said, yep. So we're getting into the genealogy. Yeah, random genealogy that shows up out of the middle of nowhere. So if you remember, been a couple weeks, so, it's a little fuzzy. I don't remember either, to be honest with you. So if you go back in chapter 6, right, and even chapter 5, Moses and Aaron talk to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, no, we're not going to let the people go. So Pharaoh then puts a little bit of tighter restrictions. They have to go find the straw to make the bricks now, as opposed to just having it there. Of course, the Israelites get punished because they can't meet the quota, because the quota didn't change, even though the parameters of building bricks did change. And so meeting with the people of Israel, Moses, is basically upset because the people of Israel are upset because it's gotten worse, not better. Moses goes to God, kind of blames him for this, says, you were supposed to do this. This didn't happen, even though God told him exactly how it was going to happen, right? And then we get into chapter 6 where God reminds Moses, right? This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do, right? Just as he does with all promises, all reminders. It's always back to him, who he is, what he's going to do, okay? And then we get in verse 10, this kind of call to action. And I'm just going to start there. So the Lord said to Moses, go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me, for I am of uncircumcised lips? But the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge about the people of Israel and about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the people out of Israel, the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Okay, so God says, go get them. Go tell Pharaoh, we're going to leave. We're going to do this thing. Moses says, I don't know. Right, it seems like a good plan. I'm not sure I'm the guy to do it. My verbiage, my speech is not very good. And then they kind of have this little confab, if you will, right? Like they come together and they have this little conversation. And then we get this genealogy, okay? Just in the middle of this conversation that's happening between Moses and Aaron and God, okay? So we go into the genealogy. So these are the heads of their fathers' houses, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. These are the clans of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. These are the clans of Simeon. These are the names of the sons of Levi according to their generations, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, the years of the life of Levi being 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni and Shimei, by their clans, the son of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel, the sons of the life of Kohath being 133 years. The sons of Merari, Mahil, and Mushi. These are the clans of the Levites according to their generations. I'm just going to stop there for a quick second. So, genealogy. And we get some big names to start. We get Reuben, then we get Simeon, and then we get Levi, right? And so we kind of get those big names from Genesis that we're familiar with. But then we get none of the rest, right? It just basically stops. It's just Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And the thought process behind that is basically when you get to your family, you don't have to keep going. Because where was Moses from? Which tribe? Levi, right? So you start at the top, Reuben, Simeon, Levi. Great, my family line, I don't have to go down any further, okay? And so you stop there. And so as you continue on, what you see after he gets to Levi is all of a sudden you start magnifying in on Levi's lineage. As you notice even with like Reuben and Simeon, just kind of base names, not digging deep into the genealogy. But as soon as you hit Levi, we magnify in even further and further and further and get more specific. And that's typically how you would talk about your genealogy, your lineage. You would start with the 12 from the top to the bottom. When you got to your tribe, you didn't go any further. And you just magnify then into your own family line. Okay? So that's why we have that piece of it. It's this oddity where we have the 3 brothers out of the 12. We just don't go into the other 9. Apparently, they don't exist or something like that. They just don't matter for what's going on here. And what is going on here, going back to verse 12, Moses' objection, behold, the people have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me, for I have uncircumcised lips? Essentially, who am I to do this, right? Like, why am I the guy to do this? I'm not sure I'm the guy to do this. And so then we get this genealogy. And what this does for the reader in Moses' day and beyond is it says, yes, Moses has these questions about his ability, his authority, his authenticity to do this, but basically here are his credentials that show he is the guy to do this. The genealogy serves as an identification of sorts to say, even though Moses doubts his ability or his presence in the moment, he is actually the guy to do it, and here's the proof. Because he belongs to the tribe of Levi, this is his bloodline, this is his lineage, he is absolutely one of the guys to do it. Okay? So this genealogy that appears out of nowhere is not just some random occurrence, it's an identification. It's basically showing, yeah, Moses has his doubts, but here's why you don't have to doubt as the reader that Moses is the guy to actually do this. And Aaron too, as Aaron also came from the tribe of Levi. Okay? So that's the purpose of this. It really is kind of that identification piece, saying, yeah, Moses has got his questions. You may have them after hearing Moses, like, yeah, maybe he's got a point. Maybe Moses isn't the guy to do this, right? Nope. Here's the reasons why. This is his family line. He is absolutely the guy to be doing this. Okay? And I think we've run into that a little bit previous with that oddity of God wanting to kill him, right? With the circumcision and things. It's that piece of, yeah, but here he is, right? Here's the guy and he's okay to do this. Like, if you're wondering that, don't wonder anymore. He's the guy to do it. Okay?
Pastor, in verse 12,
Yeah.
the NIV says faltering lips.
Faltering lips, yeah.
But in ESV it says uncircumcised lips.
Mm-hmm.
So was Moses uncircumcised at this point?
No, he is circumcised, because that was the events that took place in that random inn where they were staying. God shows up to kill him. His wife, no, I'm sorry, that's his son, isn't it? I'm sorry, my apologies. I told you, I forgot everything over the course of the week. That's his son. But no, Moses is circumcised. Okay. Yep, 100%. Yep.
I quickly Googled it, and this person, Midrash Takuma, lists Moses as among the several special people who were born circumcised. They are Adam, Seth, Noah, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and Joel.
Must be a Jewish tradition that got passed down. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Yeah, no. As we talked about with Moses' birth, now it's all coming back. Here we go. Now we're all here again, right? All right, good. No, as we talked about with Moses' birth, being raised in a Hebrew house by his mother, even though technically Pharaoh's daughter took him in, right? There still would have been those opportunities for circumcision to follow all the traditions, all the rituals, because even with mom giving him up on the river, right, he was still of the age where he should have been circumcised, because it's 8 days after birth. And so very much so would have been circumcised. The uncircumcised part in this is speaking more just to the lack of fluency or the lack of, what do you want to call that, authority or even just ability. Yeah. I can't speak to being born circumcised. I don't know much about that. Like I said, that must be part of the Jewish tradition somewhere along the line. There's a lot of interesting pieces that come from Jewish tradition. I'm not familiar with all of them, but the ones I am familiar with, they're fascinating. Just fascinating instances where you go, oh, maybe. There's nothing that says one way or the other on it, so you never know. Because again, all this stuff is passed down, right? So it's the Jewish people themselves are very good at that, right? Passing down the history, those who take it seriously. And so it's a very fascinating thing when you understand some of these things that have been passed down. But of course, just like anything, like the telephone game, right? We had that in the children's message a couple weeks ago. From one point to the other, things could get lost along the way, right? Sorry. I still remember my son looking at me and go, I don't know. Yeah. Sounds good, kid. That's exactly right. I don't know. So, good question. Any other questions?
To disprove that theory, though, he says he was just slow of speech.
Yeah.
In chapter 4.
For sure. Yep. Yeah, he had
Anything to do with
no, not that instance of it.
defect.
No. But the slow of speech could be a lot of different things, right? We just don't know what is that a physical speech impediment, right? Is that
Did he stutter?
yeah, did he stutter? Did he have something of a kind of birth defect or something like that didn't allow him to speak as well as other people might have been able to
Or
speak?
he was just looking for a way out.
Yeah, no, there's no denying that, right? Because God's not like, you know what, you're right. Like this cleft lip or whatever it is really prevents you from speaking, Moses. Like, I don't even think I'd have to go back and look. I don't even think there's like an acknowledgement from God about it. Like, it's not even like he's going, yeah, it's not like God's going, you know what? Yeah, that could be a challenge, but don't worry, I'll help you overcome it. He's like, yeah, that's fine, but I'm still going to give you all the words to say, right? Like, it's not even an acknowledgement. So if you want to know how to parent, just look at how God treats Moses or Jacob or other thing, right? Great parenting there. It's great stuff. Just don't even acknowledge what they're saying. Just keep pushing. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm being serious in that piece. Like, God is the ultimate parent, right? Like, he knows how to take care of people. Like, hey, just look for that, right? But don't do it sarcastically or mean. God's not doing it that way. That's for sure. But no, it's some kind of impediment, whatever that might be, that Moses is hanging on to, but God refuses to even acknowledge, I guess you could say. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, so yeah, this genealogy seems random. It's more credentials, right? So here's the family line of Moses and Aaron in particular. Those are the two that really come out in here. Honestly, more so Aaron than Moses. That's what comes through more so in this genealogy. So it's just a fascinating little piece, but we'll talk more about that here in a second. So verse 20 is where we'll pick it back up again. It says, Amram, who's Moses' dad, took as his wife Jochebed, his father's sister, so his aunt, okay? And she bore him Aaron and Moses, the years of the life of Amram being 137 years. The sons of Izhar, Korah, Nepheg, and Zikri, the sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri. Aaron took as his wife Elisheba, the daughter of Aminadab, and the sister of Nashon, and she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. The sons of Korah, Asir, Elkanah, and Abiasaph. There you go. Got to just twist the tongue a little bit differently on that one. These are the clans of the Korahites. Eleazar, Aaron's son, took as his wife one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. These are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their clans. These are Aaron and Moses, to whom the Lord said, bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their hosts. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the people of Israel from Egypt, this Moses and this Aaron. Okay? So there again, you see that credential piece, right? It's interesting that the translation here, which is very literal, right? So it's how it's meant to be translated. These are the Moses and Aaron, right? It's not saying that's Moses, that's Aaron. These. It's kind of odd grammatically for us as English speakers. But then you get this Moses and this Aaron at the very end, right? So again, here are their credentials. These are the guys God's using to bring them out of Egypt. It's all good. You can trust that concept that these are the people. Even though Moses has his doubts, and while it's not necessarily recorded yet to this point, Aaron probably has his doubts too, right? That's a big task to bring a whole nation out of Egypt. And so even in that, these are the guys, this Moses, this Aaron, okay?
How come it didn't mention anything about Moses' wife and kids?
Ha! You caught that, huh? Yeah, that's a good question, right? So essentially what we see there in verses 23 through 25 is a really deep dive into Aaron's family, right? So you see Aaron took as his wife. Here's all the information about that. Here's the sons, all of those things. And one of the thoughts behind that, why Aaron and not Moses in that laying it out, is that Aaron's sons became the high priests in the temple as part of his lineage. Moses' sons became more helpers, so not as much prominence into the temple life as Aaron's family. And so that's one of the thought processes behind that, is that you just don't hear a lot of Moses' family here because there's not a lot of prominence behind it. Aaron's family, however, becomes really involved in the temple, specifically serving as the high priest. Okay? So that's the thought process. I don't know that that's nailing it, like that's the reason why. It could have just been Moses like trying to lift up his brother as he's writing this book, right? Like, don't really know for sure, but that seems to be at least the most plausible explanation, that people would recognize these names as they continued on in the story, because Aaron became the high priest, right? And then his son became the high priest and talked about later, right? Whereas Moses' sons really aren't mentioned throughout the rest of the scriptures. Good question. So yeah, then in verse 20, this is where we understand Moses and Aaron's parents. It's where we get the names, right? Amram and Jochebed. Jochebed. So that's just who Moses and Aaron's parents are. It's interesting that we got to wait 6 chapters to find out the name of Moses' mom, right? She's talked about all the way in chapter 2, so maybe 4 chapters, 5 chapters. But it takes us that long to find out her name, right? And even Moses' dad. Yeah, in chapter 2, she's just known as a Levite woman. And in chapter 2, a man from the house of Levi. So not even really names being mentioned.
It must be very confusing because I have a huge note on that verse in my Concordia Bible.
Yeah.
And the note basically says that Amram and Jochebed were not the immediate parents.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in that note, and it goes on and on and on, and it's very confusing.
Huh. Yeah, I'm looking at my notes. In terms of the study Bible I've got here, it doesn't really say much about that.
They say not the immediate parents, but the ancestors of Aaron and Moses. So
That's interesting.
Itself, I guess.
I'd have to look into that because I don't have a note about that in mine. I'm just double checking something real quick here. Yeah, I don't have anything about that in mine.
Well,
Yeah, but it's interesting,
It is.
right? It's a fascinating piece. Like, again, you talk about the genealogy being credentials, right? And yet you've got this question of parentage, right? And what is that, the immediate? How else could they then be identified as, what's the language here? Sorry, I just want to make sure. And she bore him Aaron and Moses, right? So it implies like a literal birth, right? So I'd just be curious where that all,
yeah.
how that all comes together. But don't let that be the question you ask when you get into heaven, right? People always, they always have those things like, tell me about like the flood, right? Like, where did all the water come from? Like, when you get to heaven, that's the question I'm going to ask.
Where
Don't,
did it all go?
yeah, like, where did it all go, right? Those are good questions. Don't ask, is Jochebed really Moses' mom? Like, there's so many other better questions out there. Just wait for that one. You'll find that out when you talk to him, right? Like, you'll get the answer right from the horse's mouth. So, yeah.
Slow day.
That's just hanging out at a tree and Moses said, like, by the way, who is your birth mom? Like, who was that? I remember in Bible class, on the other side of eternity. Like, yeah. No, it's good. All right, so then, as we look at the rest of these names, they just kind of seem like names, but there are ones that stand out, especially as you continue on in the first 5 books of the scriptures. These are names that will come up sometimes in Exodus, but also in other books if you were to continue on. So, for example, Elisheba, which is in Exodus 6:23, it's Aaron's wife from the tribe of Judah. But what's significant about her is she's mentioned in David's genealogy, okay? And that's a key thing, right? So, obviously, with David's genealogy comes Jesus' genealogy. Aaron serving as the priest. Aaron also serving as a mouthpiece for God, prophet, right? David being a king means that Jesus' line has the prophet, priest, and kingship, right? So all 3 things of Jesus are found in his lineage. Aaron covers 2 out of the 3, essentially. Okay? So he comes from a line of prophets, a line of priests, and a line of kings. And then we get the Korahites in verse 24. What's significant about them is that Korah, so the guy's name, led a rebellion against Moses later, and the earth swallowed him up, but his kids were spared. So there you go. Yep. And you'll read about that rebellion later in Exodus. I think that comes up later, but just kind of a note to that. Okay? So in verse 24, the sons of Korah, in other words, the survivors, whereas Korah is the one who gets swallowed up by the earth. And then we get Eleazar in verse 25. He became the next high priest after Aaron. Okay. And then in verse 25, we get Phinehas. And what's significant about him is he stands up for the Lord at a place called Peor. And because of that, the line of priests comes from his family, right? So Aaron to, how does that go there? Excuse me. From Aaron to Eleazar to Phinehas, and then basically it gets locked into Phinehas the rest of the way because of what he did at Peor, standing up for God, essentially. And again, these are names that would come up as you continue to read through the first 5 books. We may not find every single one of them in Exodus. I know we'll find Korah, and obviously we'll maybe Eleazar, but I'm not quite sure about Phinehas, if we'll actually run into him this time or not. And then again, just that piece about these are the Aaron and Moses. You know, this Moses, this Aaron, it's that credential piece, right? It's identification. These are the guys. And then, right as that ends, any questions about the genealogy before I go into it? Sorry. So we get this genealogy, we get this is the guy, we're good. And then verse 28 and following, on the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How will Pharaoh listen to me? Okay? So, if you go back to verse 10 in chapter 6, tell you what, stay at verse 28. And I'll just read from verse 10. Okay? Follow along in verse 28, but I'll read from verse 10. So the Lord said to Moses, go in, tell Pharaoh king of Egypt to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me, for I have uncircumcised lips? Okay? It's pretty close, isn't it? Like it's really close to where we left off before the whole genealogy piece. And then if you actually do look at verse 13, but the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, gave them a charge about the people of Israel and about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Well, what exactly was that charge? What was that conversation? Chapter 7. Okay? That's what we get then when we go into chapter 7. So Moses' objection, uncircumcised lips. God and Aaron and Moses have this conversation. As we get into chapter 7, here's the conversation. Okay? So it's just a very unique thing, right? Like, it's just, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just, it's an intentional pause. We kind of had like the end of season script there, if you will, with like a to be continued. We had kind of the summer month going over the genealogy, and then we came back in the fall with everything else that we had left off previous, right? Like previously in Exodus, right? Like that's kind of how it plays out here. And so that's what we see as we walk into chapter 7. Any questions about that at all? All right. So the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you." Okay? Actually, one more verse. "Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them." All right. So again, we're left with this question: how will Pharaoh listen to me? Well, this is how. Okay. You'll speak on my behalf to Pharaoh, but it's not going to work again. It's okay. It's all part of the plan. I got some other things in mind. But just know, this is how it's going to go down. So, how are you going to do it? Well, go talk to him. Give him the words through Aaron, right, your brother. Go speak to him. Pharaoh's going to go, "That's nice. I'm not listening again," right? And then I'm going to do some other things here that really might change his mind. Because if you look ahead, starting in verse 14, we get to the first plague, right? So chapter 7 really begins the whole plague piece. So God answers Moses, gives him the plan. Oh. Sorry. It's the same plan as last. No, I'm just kidding. That's So God already knows, verse 3, that Pharaoh's heart will be hardened. And again, we talked about this. You know, God says, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart." People go, "Well, why would he do that? It's just going to make it worse. Why wouldn't he soften it to do this?" It's that thing of God knowing what needed to be done was not going to be something where Pharaoh went, "Wow, this is cool. You are the God of all things," right? It's only going to make it worse. It's not going to make it better. And yet God knew these are the things that still had to happen in order for Israel to be let go. So it's not like God's sitting there going, "Yes, I'm going to pour more concrete on Pharaoh's heart to make it harder because that's real fun," right? He's going, "These are the ways that my people are going to know I'm the God of all things." It's going to rub Pharaoh the wrong way, and it's going to make it more difficult for him to let go. That's kind of the gist.
It's interesting, though, that, Pharaoh, this all-powerful guy, God's involved, obviously, but he keeps listening to them. He keeps having them back.
Yeah.
Talk to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the very least, he's open. He hasn't killed him yet, so that's cool, right? Like, could have easily just wiped him out by now if he wanted to. Yeah, say what you will. At least he has an open door policy, right? Like, it's just, yep. Which is always what you look for in a ruler, right? Some open door policy. Yeah, no, it is fascinating. And again, it's an interesting dynamic. I'd be curious to see and do more study into like the ruling architecture of the pharaohs. Like how how did they function in that role? We know, I should say I know, like, enough to be dangerous. I don't know the specifics of it, and I know there have been some pretty intensive studies done on how the infrastructure looked. I'd be curious to see, like, yeah, just two guys walking in off the street going, hey, we'd like to talk to Pharaoh. Oh, yeah, I know, come on in. Like, that's great. Yeah, that's fine, not a problem, right? Like, it's like going to, like, Amazon or something going, I'd like to talk to the CEO. Who are you? I'm Joe Behnke. Oh, that's fine. Come on in. Yeah, that's great. Come on in. Yeah, like,
Especially true when you get a few plagues in.
yeah, especially as you get later on, you're like, it's not exactly the most ideal, right? Like, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So then we get verses 6 and 7. Moses and Aaron did so. They did just as the Lord commanded them. Now Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. I will not be speaking to any world leaders when I am 80 or 83 years old. That is not something I feel like that God has called me to do. So, but it's just, you get the ages there of what they're working on, which is how we figured out how old Moses was when he left his father-in-law's place, right? All of those things. So we get Moses being 80, Aaron being 83 years old. Okay. And then we get into kind of the precursor, if you will, here, right? So then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, prove yourselves by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent, right? So a little background before the event actually happens, right? So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpent. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Okay.
That was really fakey in the movie.
It was. Yeah. Yeah, they didn't have the special effects budget to really have snakes swallow each other. Yeah. Yeah. I have no love lost for snakes. They could have done that in real time. I would have been fine with that, right? Like, I mean, it's just that thing. But no, it looked really. It would have been something to see live. Like, I'm sure you're watching that going, huh, that's fascinating, right? But and there's always this question of, well, how did Pharaoh's magicians do that? Like, we have this understanding of how God does this with Moses and Aaron, but how did Pharaoh's magicians do that? It's the same thing as making people disappear, right? Like, there's just illusions, sleight of hands, but also you can't ignore Satan's foothold in places to make things happen, right? Like, I don't want to minimize that piece as if somehow, well, it's just making a quarter appear behind someone's ear, right? Like, that's the extent of their magic. Like, well, Satan can do a lot of things to make things happen, and you see that in some of the dark arts that happen. Well, okay, going into I think it's end of 1 Samuel, into 2 Samuel. It is still in 1 Samuel. The witch of Endor, right? Calling Samuel's soul, right? Because Saul wants to speak to him before he goes to battle. Samuel's dead. And here this witch of Endor calls Samuel up, and it's like, what are you doing, man? This is not good. Samuel tells him, this is not going to end well for you, which it doesn't, because in that battle, Saul is killed, right? But you have these moments of dark arts where you just go, again, that's not a quarter making appear behind someone's ear. There's some things to that, and how does that happen? How does that take place? I don't know. I just know you can't discredit or discount Satan's work in the world. That's all I know. Yeah. The minute you do that is the minute that things go horribly wrong. Because he's got you, right? In some extent that Satan just is not as powerful as you think, right? And it's just not somebody to take lightly at all. At all. Yeah. So yeah, it had been quite the sight to see. Much better than Charlton Heston's act of it. Yep. Much better, for sure. For sure. But this also is significant, right? We talked about the appearance of the snake, right? Why a snake? Why those things? It is the symbol of power. It is the symbol of vitality for the Egyptians. This is not just, a random animal. Well, hey, it kind of looks like a snake, the staff does, so therefore it's going to be a snake, right? Like, sorry, I just picture them making Play-Doh snakes, right? Or something like that. Like, now be a snake, right? But it's a legit message, right? Not just that God would make a snake come out of a staff, but then he would have them swallow up every other snake, right? Because it's basically saying, that's nice. I'm the God of all power, vitality, all of those things. That's just the way it's going to be, and that's who I am. So it is a message. And Pharaoh receives that message. He's not oblivious to it. I mean, that's what we see in verse 13. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. He's not impressed. It's not because of parlor tricks or things. It's because he gets the message loud and clear. And pharaohs are gods. And to acknowledge someone else as God is to acknowledge that you are no longer a God, right? And Pharaoh was not going to be in the place to do that at all. At all. Okay? Any questions about that at all? All right. Well, I don't necessarily have a study guide going forward here, but let's just keep walking into chapter 7. It's all pretty familiar at this point. We've all seen the movie, right? Everybody seen the Ten Commandments? Yeah. Anybody not see it? I was going to say, it's been a long time, admittedly. Like it used to be on, what was that, every Thanksgiving?
No,
Easter. That's what it was. Thank you. It was a holiday. Yeah. Yeah. Don't know why Easter, right? Like, okay. There's the definite, like, again, Moses is a type of Jesus. Like, we've talked about that a little bit. There's the serpent being lifted up in the desert. I'm not sure that that's actually covered, though. Maybe it is. I can't remember. It's been so long. It's been so long since I've seen the movie. But, yeah, it always showed up around Easter time.
I just figured it was a Jewish event that snuck in on a Christian holiday.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. Yep. Yeah, it could be.
Explain that when you get to that one.
Right. Yeah. So now we get the plagues, right? So verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that turned into a serpent. And you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you have not obeyed. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. Ugh. Ugh. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, so that they may become blood, and there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So starting off strong, right? In terms of what the first plague actually is. And it's not, I just read something about this that's fascinating when it comes to Moses and his staff and the significance of water and blood and all of those things. And I think we're going to see it more clearly later on. There's moments in the Exodus where Moses is commanded to get water from a rock, right? And so in one instance, he's supposed to strike it. In another instance, he's supposed to speak to it, and instead of doing that, he hits it again, right? And that's the whole reason why he can't enter into the promised land that second time, because he didn't listen. But there is this strong connection here even in this, the first plague, into those moments where water is coming from the rock. And the cool connection that was made was, when Jesus dies on the cross and they pierce his side, what comes out of it? Water, right? And it's blood. It's like it's been separated, right? And so it's just fascinating how some of these things come into that. We'll talk more about that, but I don't know that there's a strong connection there, but there is something to be said of water turning to blood, right? And Jesus on the cross and the water and the blood separating as he's pierced on his side. So it's just some of those connections that you gotta go, like, what is that and what's that about, right? Just some of those interesting pieces. So, yeah.
He sweat blood in Gethsemane.
He did, yeah. Yep, sweating blood in Gethsemane, yep. Now, I know some people have looked at this plague and they said, well, it was like an algae bloom or something like that, right? Because you can have red algae and it looks like blood and all those things. No, you got to make it what it is, right? God says it's blood, right? There's no question about that. When I lived in Worthington at my first church, they have a pond there, a lake, and that was just always an algae bloom. Like, you couldn't go swim in it really ever because it was just constantly in an algae bloom. That one was green, but it did stink and it was gross, and you couldn't let your dog drink from it because they would get sick and even die. Like, it was really bad. But that's not what we're seeing here, right? This is God being very clear. This is blood in the water, and it causes a stink, and it causes an issue. And you think about that, right? Drinking the blood. Like, you have to drink something. You can't just go without water. And it's not even the Nile. It's every single piece of water, like every single inch in the land of Egypt. Imagine you're in your pool while this is going on, and you're just doing a backstroke, and you go, what is this, right? Like, what happened? Like, every bit of it. There was not one thing where you couldn't drink blood, essentially, or be immersed in it as part of it. So it's just crazy. Okay? And what I do like is God basically with Moses saying, here's the deal. When Pharaoh gets up in the morning to bathe, go meet him, right? So basically, how would you like that? You're going to your bathroom in the morning to go jump in the shower, and Moses is just standing there in front of the door going, hey, this is all going to change, right? Like, it's just, you couldn't avoid it. You couldn't miss it. It's intentional, right? God is basically making sure Pharaoh would not miss this. Even if it did turn to blood, Pharaoh could have done whatever. No, you are going to be right there in front of him as this happens. There's going to be no question where this came from and how this happened. Now, something to point out, and I think there's been some connection to that already, and maybe you have made the connection, maybe you haven't. Moses has his staff, Aaron has his, right? And so it's not like they're sharing a staff here. They've got each individual staffs that they're working with. Moses stretches his out over the Nile. I'm sorry, it's not stretching it out. What did it say? It said, I think it's hitting it, right? Hang on one second.
Stretch out.
Is it the stretch out? Yeah, Aaron is stretching out.
In verse 17.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, verse 17. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Strike the water. That's what it is. Yep. So Moses strikes the water, Aaron stretches it out. Okay. Yeah. Any questions about that at all?
Would this have impacted the Israelites too?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Where are they going to get water?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yep. Which makes it not better, but feel worse, right? Yep. So then in verse 20 it continues. It says, Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded in the sight of Pharaoh, as the man's just trying to bathe in the morning. And in the sight of his servants he lifted up the staff and struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned to blood. And all the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt, but when the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts, so Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile. 7 full days passed after the Lord had struck the Nile. Okay. So in other words, they're trying to find anything else. Like, where else is there some water? Can we find some? Where else can there be? They're trying to see it all, if they can get it. Okay. One more thing I wanted to point out, if you go back to verse 19, right? So it's not even just like the water. It's also the sources of water, like the vessels of wood and vessels of stone. So if anybody had anything in their house, like if they drew water earlier that day, blood, right? And what I'm fascinated by in this is in my ESV, it talks about, it says a natural chemical phenomenon was immediately intensified and precipitated by the hand of God and affected all the tributaries of the Nile. Dead fish made the river stink. Okay, you can sit there and say that that's perhaps what happened. But then how do you explain that whole wood and stone vessel piece, right? So you talk about what's already in those places. It's out of the water. It's not like it's going to naturally increase that because it's already pulled out. It's set aside. It's different. And so, again, we can look at this. I've seen a lot of different specials on TV. I usually see a National Geographic in it in the grocery store line around Easter time, of all places. You say that, Nate, now it's like, oh, yeah, why do we see all these Egypt things around Easter? Trying to naturally explain all the phenomenon of the plagues and everything. Just let it be what God said, right? This is what it is. This is what happened. Don't have to explain everything, right? My favorite phrase, and probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm a Lutheran, besides other things, but the biggest reason is I can say, I don't know, and it's okay, right? Like, legit, 100%. Like, well, why is it this way? Why is it this way? And that's not to say you don't try to do some study. You don't try to do some looking into it. But it is perfectly fine to say, I don't know. And it's okay to not know. It really is. And again, that's not to diminish any study or research or anything. It's good to do that digging. It's good to use that time because I think it draws you closer to God and who he is. But at the end of the day, all of it could lead to that place of just saying, you know what? I don't know. And that's okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You could look at it as the people who were ultimately let go had to suffer before that all happened. They had to go through the suffering, like say, not having the water and that type of thing. Just like so many times we need to go through suffering in order to get to some goal.
Yeah. You know, God never promises that that somehow suffering will not be a part of life, right? I mean, there's a whole book dedicated to that. I think it's called Job, right? Like, go ahead and read it, right? Like, that's a legit thing, and that's the hard part in life is, like even tonight, you know, talking about trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. One of the things I'm preaching on tonight is what's so frustrating is I was looking for resources about that, is we turn that into, well, if I just trust, everything will be okay, right? Like somehow the paths being straight means that life will be good and God will continue to lead and guide in a good way, like somehow removing struggles or things of that nature. Nowhere is that supported in Scripture, and nowhere has that been supported in my life, right? Like the places that God has brought me with, no, he's been with me 100%. There's no question. But they're not joyful times, you know? They're not the moments where you're going, wow, that was really easy. Wow, that was really good. It must be because God made my way straight in this. No, there's been real struggles, right? And that's part of the life of faith. Eternity is what we keep walking towards. And that's where we find the life of no more struggles, no more sufferings, no more nothing. But the journey of life just will have those. It's part of a sin-filled and broken world. And so, yeah, the people of Israel, you kind of look at this and you go, well, they're innocent here. Why doesn't God do something special for them? It's all part of the journey. And I don't understand. Like, Just as I don't understand some of the struggles I see other people going through, or I myself go through it. Why go through this? Why put them through this? Whatever it might be. Again, I don't know. But I do know that he's with me, he's with them, and just continues to walk. And whatever that is for something on the other side of that, right? Yeah. It would be really nice if that was the promise of God, that on this side of eternity, it would mean no more suffering or anything. But the reality is, it actually probably leads to more, because Satan doesn't like it, right? When you're walking with God, when you're with him, when you're trusting him, it usually means things get worse, not better, because he's working overtime to really try to get you pulled away from him. Yeah, if Satan's leaving you alone, that's time for a reality check, right? That's the time to go, how's my walk with God? Because, boy, if I'm being left alone, he's got me right where he wants me, right? Yeah.
Then we determine we don't need God. If everything is going along so well and this road is straight and wonderful, why do we need God?
Yeah, absolutely. That becomes the challenge, right? Our thankfulness goes away, because you forget real easily when life is good, just how big of a role God plays in our lives. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Good thoughts. So they had a week of this. Stinky, stinky river and stinky, stinky fish. Any questions about that at all? I just had a quick note about verse 20, that the river's blood may be seen as Israel's God slaying the god of the Nile, which was Happy or Happy. And so maybe that's one of the things behind it. But I think at the end of the day, it's still God showing himself to be the God over all things. That Nile, as we talked about previous, it's the life source for the Egypt. Like, it's the commerce, it's their backbone, right? And now they have no more control over it, right? There's no influence over it. There's nothing. There's this outside force, for lack of a better way of saying it, that's controlling it now, and it's not something that's friendly to them. So.
And the magicians could duplicate, but they couldn't reverse.
Correct.
What God did.
Yeah, they could make it happen again, but they couldn't.
Which wasn't real helpful.
Which again, you as a Pharaoh, you go, that's nice that you can duplicate it. What can you do about it, though? Like, can you get it to go away? Like, you would think that would be the impressive piece. That's a great catch, John. You know, like, I'm glad you could redo this, just in case we need that later on. But, like, can you undo this piece? And that wasn't going to be a thing. No, that wasn't going to be a thing. Yeah, that's a good catch. You really want an impressive party trick. Yeah, make it go away, right? Yeah. So then we get into the second plague, the frogs. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go in to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the houses of your servants and your people and into your ovens and in your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and on all your servants.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt.' So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt."
Like they didn't have enough frogs?
Yeah, like they didn't have enough. So what I always think of this is during the spring we have neighbors who have a pond next door. Any of you remember Kathy Grauer? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we found out, while Kathy was still living, that their first house, her and Fred's, or at least one of their initial homes, was the house that's next door to our current house. So, yeah, we kind of had a small connection there. But one of the owners down the road put in a pond, which is very nice. It looks nice. It sounds nice. Except in the spring, there's these frogs, right? And you're trying to sleep at night with the windows open because it's beautiful, right? You got the windows open and you just hear the noise all night, right? Like it is just constant. And you could say a lot of things about the frogs going in all these different places. The noise must have just been, oh yeah, so beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah, it's often what I listen to when I try to go to sleep. You've got the thunderstorm, you've got the rain, and then you got the frog croak, right? Like, it's all right there, 100%. Like, just that alone would be way too much for me. I'd be like, here, you can have them. Like, take your people, get out. I want nothing to do with it. I want nothing to do with them. Oh, yuck. Yuck. Ugh. So one of the notes I have here is the Egyptian goddess Hecht was thought to take the form of a frog that helped women as they gave birth to children. Okay? And so in other words, kind of just saying, well, hey, you've got this God who makes things multiply. Let me show you how I can multiply these frogs, right? And kind of God's way of showing dominion over Hecht, right? Just an interesting little note there. So then we get into verse 8. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, plead with the Lord to take the frogs away from me and from my people. See, he hates the croaking too. I'm just telling you. And I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, and the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile. And he said, tomorrow. Moses said, be it as you say. So in other words, tomorrow, that's when it needs to happen. Be it as you say, Moses says, so that you may know that there is no one like the God or the Lord our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your houses and your servants and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile, which is not great either. Like, there's still so much of them, right? So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs as he agreed with Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So the ancient nostril must have been a very unique thing, right? Like the smells that they could endure. Just incredible. Just incredible. Ugh. Ugh. It's not good.
That was because all the frogs croaked.
Wow. Wow, that's good, Nate. Yeah, that's good, yeah. Well, I want to make sure the people on the live stream hear that. So Nate said, is it all, how did you say that again, Nate?
It's because the frogs croaked.
It's because the frogs croaked. So there you go. You can take that and unsubscribe right now if you'd like, right? It doesn't go up from here. It's pretty much the level. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a fascinating thing though, right? God, they're going to go in the Nile. It's not clear about how they get to the Nile, right? Not saying that they're going to be a living beast anymore. Yeah, it's just, ugh. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to know if the frogs pluck their magic twangers.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Probably before they croaked. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yep, 100%. Oh, my gosh. Oh. Bull. Bull. Yeah.
In your concordance, and
Yeah.
it says that the frogs maybe came out of the Nile due to bacteria and algae,
Yeah.
and that's what killed them then,
Yeah.
on the land?
Supposedly. Or God just said, you're
That
dead.
seems
Yeah.
like it's, because then when you read the one about what it says, it says then they probably died due to that algae, and I'm thinking, well, so God created the algae, so they died.
Yeah.
I
See,
thought you just killed the frogs. but
right.
This is a little more.
And that's again where I'm of the opinion, you just let God's word speak to what it says, right? And it talks about the frogs dying, right? Just leave it there, right? It's for me at least, when I read this text. I just look at it and go, that's what Scripture says. That must be what happened. Could it have been a red algae bloom that did this? Sure, except that I think frogs are pretty robust when it comes to algae and things. I'm not trying to go back to Worthington all the time on that, but there wasn't a shortage of frogs in that lake, even though there was huge algae blooms, right? Even the fish themselves, fish did okay. You just didn't want to eat the fish in that pond. So the way I look at it, the way I see it is, they came. What was it? Where did the frogs come from? They came from all the canals, right, over all the pools, and make the frogs come up out of the land. So that's where they came out of. They're on the land now. Pharaoh basically concedes. And even that statement of, where is that? I just want to make sure I get that right. Plead with the Lord, right? That's a submission statement. Basically, Pharaoh is saying, all right, he wins, right? He's the God, I'm not, right? So no, they're on the land. They die on land, and then they kind of move them around from that point.
Yeah, but so why do they do that in these? I mean, it sort of makes it confusing. I'm like you, I believe that God
Yeah, sure.
died, and then
Yep.
now they're telling us, well, it was because of Mexico.
Yeah, I don't know why, especially because, my version in particular comes from, a Missouri Synod background. This is kind of the Missouri Synod piece. So I know that the typical view of the Missouri Synod has been to just let God be God, right? That's kind of one of the foundational pieces. So I'm not quite sure why they're going to the lengths they are to try to bring in other elements where Scripture isn't speaking to that, right? It doesn't, I don't think it's helpful, personally.
It seems to me it lessens it.
It does.
It lessens the power of God.
Genesis, right? God created. He spoke and it happened, right? That's a significant thing. That's not just a minor detail. God needed nothing to make something happen. And now we're saying here, but he needs the algae in order to turn the river red. Or he needs to use the algae to kill the frogs. Just not how he operates. He's the God who speaks and it happens. He's the God who can make frogs appear out of nowhere, because then where do you get the frogs? It's not like there are this many frogs living initially in the river. People would have seen that, would have understood that, and actually it wouldn't have been much of a plague then. If you think about it, if there's already that many frogs running around, people would be like, it's Tuesday, right? It's not a big deal. But, it's. Oh, so many jokes. We got to move on to gnats here soon. That's just got to happen next week. But
That must be the CSI Egypt.
yeah, the CSI Egypt crew is very much on it. Yeah, that's exactly right. But no, I don't know why they try to do that. I think I agree with you on that, Shirley. It feels lessening. That this is not God doing his thing, right? God's word is more than enough to do what it needs to do. Whether that's empowering Moses to speak when he's not qualified or feels unqualified, I should say, or even making frogs appear out of the Nile and out of bowls and all these other things. Yeah, no, I'm not sure why they continue down that road. I don't think it's helpful. Yeah, I don't think it's helpful.
I had to make sure it's Concordia one.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, mine looks a little different, but yours is very much the Concordia self-study Bible. Yep. Yeah.
I'm just gonna write.
Oh. Tiger Club. Sorry about that. I didn't even see that. We got Tiger Club here. I'm going to pass this around. We'll wrap up. So yeah, we'll come back next week. We'll go into gnats. And hopefully by that time we won't have any of our own. What's that?
Far worse than frogs.
Far worse than frogs. Well, if the frogs were still alive, the gnats then could be eaten and it would be fine. You'd have an ecosystem. But yeah, now that the frogs are dead, yeah, the gnats are going to be a problem.
And running, I've never seen,
Yeah.
I've never seen a frog run.
Oh.
Have you seen a frog run?
on Looney Tunes all the time. Like that's, they sing, they run, they dance. Like it's just, they do the whole 9 yards, Kate. Like they just go, right? Well, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to go into your word today. And Lord, help your word to be enough as we look at these plagues, as we look at just the things that are happening in our lives and the way you come into them. Let your word be what we need, what we see, and what we hear as we work through the things we have going through, whether it's suffering or joy. Wherever you find us today, wherever we find you, just help us to see you constantly at work with your word. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we'll see you next week.